Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Tommy T, and I'm an alcoholic.
Tommy T.
I'd like to just get us a little centered here with a prayer that a good friend of a lot of ours, Bob B., gave me many years ago. It goes, "My God, the soul you have placed in me is pure. I am free to live differently today than yesterday. Because it is pure, I am free to live without the burden of past habits, past fears, past mistakes, and past failures. I am free to look at my past without repeating it, to examine for it lessons to be learned and amends to be made, to draw from it what guidance I can to live differently today. My God, may I use today's gift of freedom to further my capacity to serve you by serving your children with justice, compassion, and humility." Pretty much sums up what we do here in AA, whether you know it or not. We're going to talk, I think the topic's name is Our Dirty Little Secrets. I really don't have much on the topic, but we'll see what we can do. And a true statement is 30 years ago, I didn't think I had, too much because I was so delusional. So how do we break that down and, uncover, discover, and discard those things that are holding us back so badly? Those old ideas, those fixed ideas that we have that we just hold, we cling to, even though that's not working in any way, shape, or form in our lives. Our book will tell you it's simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid, right? We have to get down to what it is. I don't know what my I know I have alcoholism now. I've sat with George a few sessions, and I'm starting to feel a little hope. And we had knelt down and held hands, which was very weird in New York. We don't do that with other men. And said a third step prayer. And George was so corny, and so on fire, this guy. Now just picture a bald-headed old dude, covered in tattoos, and he was excited about that. I was his first guy. And we say that prayer, and I think I'm done for the night, And he says, "Wait, I got a present for you." And he reaches under the table and he says, one of those classic old black and white notebooks we used in elementary school, if you're my age. And he said, "Next, we launch out on a course of vigorous action." And he's like giddy about it. And I'm like, I know what's coming. I can count to 4. Like, this is not what I've been looking forward to, is writing things down. It goes against all my old ideas. In New York, you don't write stuff down. That's evidence, I mean, you just don't do it. Can I use a code? Was my first question, And, we're definitely not going to tell anybody about it. That's self-incrimination. You just don't do that. That's not how I was brought up. Real men don't talk about their problems. You don't tell anybody you're in fear. You don't admit your shortcomings. That doesn't happen. But it must for guys like us. It must. I don't know that at that point. So I just said, like I said, I'm going to disprove that this process works. That's the mindset I had at this point. And he went through the directions, and it took me 9 days to write that 4th step. 96 names on it. I had 31 resentments for a father I hated, blamed him for my whole life. You don't understand. If you had my father, you'd drink like me too. Everybody in my family drinks. I had 29 resentments for my mother because she smothered me. One I didn't think loved me. One I think loved me too much. How do you raise a kid like that? Right? I don't know. But and she just wouldn't leave the only man she's ever been with and ever loved to save a guy like me. So I hated my parents. I told you I thought I had no fears. That's ridiculous. Now I know why he laughed at me when I said that. And back then, they told me in the relationship inventory, "Tommy, you're going to take a look at your substantial relationships." And I said, "Well, what's substantial?" They said, "Let me keep it simple for a guy like you. You knew the girl's last name." That was how we defined the relationship. He said that the strippers, the one-night stands, that's all going to go in another category. We'll just lump them together. Faceless and nameless women, we would put them. But we're going to look at those other relationships. And he kept me in the column that we were writing, which was huge for me. So to make a list of 96 people that I had resentments for, easy. I was smoking cigarettes back then, so it would be a pack of Marlboro, a pot of coffee. I was fired. I had a lot of time on my hands. I would write and just write. So in 9 days, I finished the resentment, the fear, and the relationship inventory. And we were working on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. So I'd do a column or the first and second column. Then Thursday night, I'd get third column instruction. I'd call them on Saturday, stop over, come on over, do it. There's a lot to be said about spiritual momentum in that fourth step. You know, my home groups are 12 and 12. And so every rotation, we're reading the fourth step. And you always get somebody. Oh, my God, I'm in my fourth step for 7 months. Now, in my evangelical stage of my recovery, I would just shoot my hand up after that person and blow them up in the open meeting. I'd like to think I'm becoming an elder statesman, so now I will take you in the kitchen politely and just say, is that a fair thing to share in a meeting where we have new people? Well, it's the truth. No, it's not. If you're in your fourth step for 7 months, you're balking. That's what we call it. We actually have a word for that. You're balking. You're putting everything in your life more of a priority than your fourth step, which, gentlemen, I can tell you, inventory in this deal is, I think, the most important tool that we have next to prayer. Because we pray, we write down, we see truth. Now, what you do with that truth, that's another thing. But I didn't know the truth. I really thought I was a victim. I really thought, Tom, why can't you stay in a relationship for more than a year? I don't know. I always date the crazy ones. I thought it was their fault. It wasn't, none of my life was my fault. That's how I came into this. And I prayed and I wrote. And I got to tell you, fellas, when it came time to share that stuff, I couldn't believe what I wrote. So the first evidence I had of a God in my life in these 12 steps was in the fourth step. Because I was seeing things about myself I didn't really like, but I was like, that's the truth. That's really what's going on here. And so when I had that realization or that epiphany that maybe I had a little part in my life's misery, my sponsor made it like it was the best news ever. He said, well, if it was really your father's fault, you'd have to wait for him to get better. It's your problem. But with God's help, you can solve this. I got excited. The fourth step excited me. That's how bad I was. That's the place I was at that point. And, there was a lot of things there. When I remember when we did the fear inventory, I said, George, I went back for the relationship inventory or the sex inventory directions. And I said, George, I could have saved us a lot of time with the fear inventory. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm afraid of everybody and everything. Always have been. What I used to think was that tightness of chest, I finally identified as fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of looking bad. Fear of disappointing people yet again. Fear of not being able to live up to my responsibilities, my roles that God assigned me as a man. Plagued me my whole life. And George just kind of went, I told you if you remember. Yeah, I remember, George. I remember. But we did that, and soon thereafter, thank God for I think it took me about 3 months to actually read these 12 steps with a sponsor. It did not take a long time. And so he got me right to the fifth step. He said, okay, listen, you're gonna share this with me. I'll give you directions that day when we're doing it. He said, but I want you to review it all and just take a look at your life from the angle you now see it. And I did that. I reviewed it thoroughly. I was told to take in the fourth column my view. I was a prosecuting attorney my whole life. I was always blaming others, building the case against others, why my life was the way they were. And I was told to look like a defense attorney and start saying, do you know what your father's childhood was like? Do you know how hard it was for him with his drinking problem to raise kids? To be a husband? Do you know how hard it could have been on your mother to be married to them? If you got some of the offshoot of his drinking, imagine what it was like to love that man, and just to see him do it. And it really spun my head. It really spun my head. There was some big takeaways after that discussion with George before I shared the fifth step. And one of the biggest ones, fellas, was that my father was a better father than I was. I knew my father. I told you guys I had two sons I've never met at this point in my life. And that was hard to look at. You know, to put it mildly, it was hard to look at. I was kind of glad that I identified the fears. You know, that kind of started to make sense to me a little bit. Like, maybe I'm not so crazy, I'm just afraid. I need to get something that's going to help me with that fear. But when I looked at the women, and I saw that I was in the same relationship with different women over a period of 24 years, even a smart guy, a stupid guy like me, has to say, well, what's the common denominator here? It's me. I acted the same way. I used my alcoholic thinking in my relationships. I thought the same way, thinking if I just did it a little differently or whatever, it would have a different outcome. And I saw myself for what I was. I never loved a woman. I thought of them as a possession. My old ideas, what it was like to be a husband and in a relationship. All I knew was what I saw my whole life. So you dominate those women. You treat them nice if you're getting what you get, what you want out of it. But if you don't get what you want, you bully them. And that's what I did. I came out of reading that relationship inventory over with tears in my eyes, not that I didn't really have in the other two parts, because I got to a place that quickly was how did these good women stay with me as long as they did? I was horrible. They were a possession. They were a conquest. They were a notch on my belt. The better the woman looked, the better I felt about myself. It was crystal clear to me. I mean, God gave me clarity on that. That was just, I don't know if shocking's the right word, but it was bad, but it was good in the same sense, because George had started to instill in me the fact that if you don't identify it, you can't change it. So now, before my fifth step, I'm all of a sudden, I'm never going to be able to change this stuff. This is way too screwed up. I am so messed up. I don't know that I can ever do this, because I don't want to I'm afraid of taking the responsibility for my own life. I don't realize that I have attracted every misery in my life to me, and that it's going to take some work, and it's going to take, our men's retreat up in New York is called Man Up. You'll see a couple of the shirts. There you go, Cliff. Thanks for the advertising. You know, I don't know that I can man up and face these things. And then all of a sudden, a wave of fear came over me about sharing them. Oh, my God. That fear was real. And we went to a beautiful place on Staten Island called Mount Manrissa. Beautiful retreat house. Beautiful grounds like this. Big grotto with a statue of Jesus in it. People used to put notes in the stones there. It was always a great place to get quiet and sit. They just knocked it down maybe 5 years ago and built condos. Just a sign of the times. Sad. And there was a big mountain there, and it had like 75 winding steps up there, these big steps that you just have to take two steps to get up a stair. And I got there, I prayed up in the car, and I said, I can't share this stuff with Joe. I had secrets. I had dirty little secrets. And what it came down to, what are those things that you're going to take to the grave? They didn't neatly fit into a resentment. They didn't neatly fit into a fear. They were just some really bad behavior. And without hesitation, fellas, starting to have a spiritual experience, I looked at those last 3 pages and I went, ripped them out, put them under the seat of the car. I said, I'm not sharing this with my sponsor. You know, that's where I was at. And I went up there, and good little sponsee, and, you know, we prayed, and then he started saying things like, you know, you have to put it all out on the table, Tom. You know, we can't leave anything out. I said, okay, let's go. We do 2.5, 3 hours. And he listened to everything except my third column. He told me that was nonsense. He said, the third column is nonsense. We're not going to listen to that. You know, I don't care how it made you feel. You know, and I was like, wait a minute, that happened to be my favorite column, you know. And so we blazed through it pretty quick. But I got into a rhythm, and you know, I'm grateful for those first experiences, because when I call my sponsor today and want to share inventory, I blurt it out in the first couple of minutes. Because I got guys that'll call me now and share something with me, and we have a half-hour call. 25, 28 minutes into it, they're getting into the real meat of the thing, and it's, well, I got to go. I got another call, you know, like, what are you doing? Just blurt it out. because there's so much freedom in that, fellas. There's so much freedom in that. So I share that, and George says to me, "Is that it, Tom?" And I said, "Yeah, that's it, George." And he said, "Oh, man, I am having such a blast going through these 12 steps with you, man. I never thought this experience would be like this." He says, "But I want to tell you, Tommy, we're only as sick as our secrets here." He says, "If you've left anything out, I'm going to be home. Give me a call. I'm going to be getting quiet with God for an hour at home, just like you are. If something comes up, give me a call." And he says, "But if you leave anything out, you might drink again." And I'm saying in my head, the voices are starting. He knows. But like I said earlier, I am a real good liar. I could blow up a lie detector. I said, "No, George, that's it." And he said, "Man, this is great." And he gives me a big hug. And he said, I'll see you Tuesday." I said, "I'll be there, brother." And I went down to my car, and George stayed up on the mountain for a little bit. And I sat in my car, and it was a warm day. And I put the key in the car, and I felt like a rush of warmth come up from under my seat. The windows weren't open, ventilation wasn't on, car didn't even start yet. And I just felt this heat come up. I was like, "Well, that's weird." I've had many sensations like that over the years since, but it was the first one that something happened. You know, you can't shake me from that belief. Something happened. And I just sat there, and I didn't turn the car on. And I look up, and I see George just standing there, and he's kind of glancing up at the sky, thanking God, and, very serene, And I said, "Shit." And I pull the papers out from underneath. I open the car door, and I yell up the hill, "George, wait up a minute." And he crosses his arms and says, "Come on up and let's finish this thing." And I went up there and I gave him my 10 lowlights, and some of which I've shared with you guys, that I was a deadbeat dad, that I had 2 sons out there that I didn't know. Told them about some sexual debauchery in the 70s and the 80s. It was just crazy. Waking up with Alex, I told them that. Pushing twice. Thanks, sponsor. So, pushing my mother down, physically abusing my mother when she was getting in the way of me going out, stealing thousands of dollars from my mother. I forgot to tell you, I'm a guy that in my 20s will do the commando crawl to steal my sick mother's money. That's the guy I was. And it was hard to tell another man. And George did the greatest thing, and those of us that sponsor guys, I encourage you. I mean, I know we all tell our experience, but for every one of those 10 worst, he knew how painful it was for me to share this stuff. I was bawling at this point. And he would say things to me like, "Yeah, that never works out well for guys like us." Like he had done something like that too. Then he'd share something with me that he did, that always embarrassed him or he was guilty or shameful about. And on some of the stuff, he said, "I never got a chance to do that, but it sounds like fun." He made it no big deal. I looked at that guy's face when I told him something to wait to see the disappointment or the frustration in his face or the disgust in his face, and it never came. He didn't treat me any different after that. This time, because he knew I was coming as clean as I possibly could be at that point, he tried to lift me up. He was much smaller than me. He could barely lift me, but he said, "I'm having a blast taking you through these 12 steps. My house tomorrow night, 6 and 7, I'm cooking pasta." And I said, "I'll be there, brother." And the miracle and the way God started to show up in these steps. So the realization of my old ideas, the realization that I am not a victim in this world, that I caused this, that I created all this havoc in my life, and I brought all this misfortune that I think I didn't deserve, was the realization in 4. But in 5, it was subtle. I felt good that I said it. I felt good that I actually followed directions, and I did clear clear away and share everything that I thought I knew at that point. But I went home that night, and I told you, I used to have insomnia in sobriety. I just couldn't sleep. My mind was too busy, couldn't shut it down, couldn't get to sleep. Used to have to read the big book to go to sleep. And I put my head on the pillow that night, and I went out. That chatter of 1,000 monkeys that's always been in my head was not there anymore. And I slept deep. I probably got into that REM sleep for the first time in 25 years. And I woke up with only about 4 or 5 hours of sleep, but refreshed, like ready to take on the world. Like, let's go. I got 6 and 7 tomorrow. Let me start reading it. This is great. So we go into 6 and 7. And who understands 6 and 7 when you knew? I mean, who knew that this step is going to take a lot longer than just tonight and these 2 paragraphs, right? Like, oh, it's 2 paragraphs, 2 in one night. We're killing it. We're killing it. I'm not quite yet in the mindset of, oh, Jesus. 8 and 9 follow 6 and 7. I'm not there yet, So I'm enjoying, like, what we're going to do in 6 and 7. But I didn't really understand it, to be frank, So I knew there was problems with lust. I knew there was problems with greed. My materialistic life was a problem, and the things I did to seek that stuff was a problem. I had a lot of character defects. I was a defective character. It's just not that I had some. I was one. I mean, that's how bad. So, like, how do you deal with that in 2 paragraphs in one sitting with your sponsor? I didn't know. But we made a list of the glaring ones, and, we started to write a prayer because, again, Bill's divine inspired genius in the big book. He says, we say something like this. It says the wording, of course, is quite optional as long as we express it, the feelings behind it. So I was encouraged, again, to read a 7-step prayer and just, start to focus on the things I was. And what we were focused on? We were focusing on the opposite of the defect. What spiritual actions? So we started to talk about spiritual actions. And, so number one was dishonesty. I mean, just seeing the delusions that I've had in my life, that's a form of dishonesty. The fact that I shape every story to make myself look better is dishonesty. We talked about dishonesty like crazy because my life was shot through with that. And so we started to talk about, so you're going to start to practice rigorous honesty. I hate that term. I still hate that term today. Why does it have to be rigorous? Can't it just be honest? You don't get more honest. It's just honest, right? Can't we just keep it simple? Rigorous is tough. And rigorous honesty, folks, for those that sponsor, doesn't have to be brutal honesty. You can be honest and be kind and loving. I'm not always that way with the sponsees. I have to be honest today. I'm not, because that's my fear and my frustration that I'm a failure as a sponsor, so I try to reach them any way I can, and sometimes I go over the line. And I'm making amends to sponsees, and I feel like a real horse's ass doing so. So this whole program starts to, and I know tomorrow we're going to talk about, how we pull it all together and try to live this way. But being rigorous honesty is tough for a guy like me. And over the years, what's that look like? Well, that looks like where God, although I think I'm doing some of it, God restores a career for me. God gives me these big positions and all this stuff. And I'm trying to look good in that job. And I have a deputy mayor that tells me, hey, Tom, we need you to go out to this meeting and say this. And I say, okay, I'm on board. And I walk away and I say, well, that's not honest. I don't want to have that conversation with that deputy chancellor. But I turn around, I say a prayer quick, and I walk back and I said, I'm just living my life by spiritual principles today, and I can't willingly go out there to 400 parents and lie to them. Are we going to make this move? Can I tell them about that move? Oh, no, you can't, Tom. I said, I can't do it. In my head, my negative thinking says I'm going to get fired or at least demoted. I'm not going to be successful anymore. And the deputy chancellor looked at me and said, don't worry about it, Tom. We'll send the press up. I appreciate your integrity. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the guy at work they all trust. How does that happen? Seriously, how does that happen from a guy like me who can't tell this? I can't tell you the truth about anything. About anything. I will embellish a good story. I remember one time as a kid, I was a pretty good baseball player. And I hit 2 home runs and a triple in a game. And I ran home. My father said, "How'd you do?" I said, "I hit 3 home runs, Dad." Next day, they put it in the paper, 2 home runs and a triple, and I said, "You're an effing liar." Well, it almost went over the fence, Dad. It hit the wall. I got a triple. Well, why didn't you say that? So a good thing, like, I just turned to garbage. But I thought he was bad for calling me out on it. You know, that's how my life was going, with that dishonesty. Honesty is the best thing we have. You don't have to remember what's true. It's true, right? Remember how many lies you had to keep track of? You know, and balance all that out. Man, that's a full-time job. If you're like me, just being honest. But now, you know, 30 years down the road, am I being brutally honest, or am I being rigorously honest and kind and loving in that? So that's something I have to look at now. And I fall short all the time. I fall short because of my fears. I fall short because maybe I'm not on the spiritual plane that day that I'm having that conversation with that sponsee, and I go a little too hard on them. I've been fired by some very good men over the years, unfortunately, but it's all right. There's always new ones to take their place. But this life, and looking at ourselves, the self-evaluation, get rid of those secrets. You know, I've heard, I don't know, 100, 110, 15, 20 fifth steps. Nobody's ever shocked me. Couple little variations in the sexual arena was like, wow, really? You know, but that's about as much as you're going to get out of me. I've heard it all. I've seen it all. I've done most of it. There's nothing that you're holding on to here, fellas, if you're holding on to something. Now, I want to tell one story about the reason that I always share about waking up, you know, with the cross-dressing dude. First of all, got a good laugh the first time I told it, so I said, what the hell, you know, I could always break the tension with that. But fellas, I'm blessed to go around and do a little speaking here and there, and I was at the Florida State Convention, maybe right after COVID, so 2021 or something, big crowd, 2,800 or something like that. Everybody was so excited to be back out at a convention after COVID. They were charged up, man. It was a great crowd. And I do my talk, and I say that thing, and the receiving line's got to be 1,000 people. I mean, it was crazy. And it's right out of COVID. Well, not half, maybe 1/3 the audience has masks, but I'm hugging the other 2/3. You know, we don't care at that point. We're just like, whatever. If I get it, I get it, you know. And I see a guy with a crew cut, probably about my age, 300 people deep. I mean, he's at the back of the orchestra section of the arena. And he's just, and I'm like, what's up with this guy? Like, do I owe this guy money? Did I sleep with his wife? I mean, he's glaring at me, you know? I'm like, this is crazy. Something's going on here. And he finally gets up. He said, I really need to talk to you. He said, can I have your phone number? And I said, just step aside, you know, with these people. He said, I need the phone number. I said, I'm going to give you my phone number. Just please step aside. So I give him my number. I said, give me a call. We'll talk. We'll sit down. And so he walks away, and he's kind of huffing, and go through the whole thing, go through the rest of the day. 7 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings, and it's ringing, and it's ringing. I didn't get out of the shower. I get out, it's ringing again. And it's this guy, his name's Pat. Pat ends up, I said, Pat, I just got out of the shower. Give me 5 minutes. Grab a coffee, meet me in the lobby. We'll sit and talk. He said, oh, thanks so much. So I go downstairs, and he's sitting there, and the legs going, you know. And this is not a young man, you know, he's my age. The legs going, and he says, I really need to tell you something. And I said, what's that? He said, I'm 17 years sober, and I just wanted to drink. He said, I did that, and I did it more than once, what you shared about the guy. And he said, and I've never told anybody. I said, have you been through the 12 steps? He said, yeah, and I lied about that to my sponsor. I've never been free of it. It haunts me. He said, I could never tell anybody about that. And I said, you just did. And I made like what George did with me, like it was no big deal, because it's not a big deal, fellas. It's what we did when we were out there, you know. And he was like, oh, my God. And I said, listen, Pat, we all do things like this. This is not a big deal. I said, but you have to tell your sponsor. If you really want to be free of this, and you say you like your sponsor, you say you trust your sponsor, well, show it. Show the power of God and talk to him. He said, I could never do that. I said, you just told me. I'm from New York. I said, tell your sponsor. He's not going to think any less of you. I think I got half of my guys have done this. Like, it's not a big deal. And he says, I can't do it, but thanks, man. I appreciate you letting me dump it on you and blah, blah, blah. And we part our certain ways. I'm doing like a little workshop like this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because that was the thing. You do your talk and then do another workshop. And the phone's blowing up, and I'm just like clicking. I look, it's not my wife. I don't know the number. I said, all right, that's cool. I get out. I call the number back. Tommy, it's Pat. I told my sponsor. You could hear the relief in his voice. In his voice. Now, I said, all right, Pat, that's great, man. Tell your wife. Because he had shared with me he was married to the same girl for like 42 years. I said, tell your wife, man. Just dump this and get done. He said, you're out of your effing mind. That's not happening. Hangs up the phone for me. I don't see Pat again. I forget Pat. It's got to be about 3 weeks later. I'm coming out of home group and my phone's blowing up. It's Pat. I told my wife. And what'd she say, Pat? She said, you were always a wild asshole. And that was it. She went on cooking. She was at the stove when he told her. It was nothing. This guy ruined 17 years of sobriety, 17 years of his life, holding on to that secret. Let him go, fellas. You got no better way to do it here. I'm just looking at you guys, and I'm guessing you're all as sick as I am. I'm just a lucky guess, but, I can see the faces pretty well. Just leave it here. Leave it here. And if you're worried about your neighborhood crew or whatever, come and talk to me and Harold. Believe me, we've heard it. We've heard it or we've done it. Don't leave this weekend with any secrets that's going to hold you back. Why would you want to do the work that we do? Why would you want to do 90% of what we do here and hold back those things that are going to hold you back from a connection with God and to start feeling like a good man? Don't settle. Don't settle. Get rid of those secrets. That's it from me, Harold.
You didn't tell him about the orangutan. Is that the next session?
I get around to that in 8 and 9.
Well, good morning. I'm Harold. I'm an alcoholic. It's great to be back. Hopefully you got some rest. And who was the Wolf champions here? Who was the big Wolf champion? There we go. Look at the pride go up, Wolves. Awesome. Who's doing the polar plunge later?
Yes!
You got two, take 3, 4. Yeah. And so if you want to know when that is, it's the newcomer panel. That's on your. If you want to learn how to yodel, go jump in that water. You'll be yodeling. So that'll be fun. But thank you, Tommy, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope around these steps. And last night we talked about steps 1, 2, and 3. And step 1 is a statement of the problem. Step 2 is a statement of the solution. And step 3 is a decision to pick up the solution to solve the problem. What is the problem? Tommy did a great job unpacking it. But it's our mind. Our book says the problem centers in our mind. And that mind has been contaminated, long before we ever drank. This great disconnection that we talked about a little bit last night. The reason that I needed relief to start with is the same reason I need relief today. I may not be getting it from a pill or a drink, but I can get it in behavior. I still need the relief. If everybody's honest, you've got this history even going on right now, at deep levels, that you still reach out for relief from worldly vices. We all do it. Every one of us, we've all done it, and that really becomes the formation of the dirty little secret and why it's so powerful. There was a French guy named Rey Descartes, and Rey was back in the 16th century. He went around Europe and he studied what he believed truth. He discovered it not only in written text, but he also discovered it in personal experience by just going around the world and checking things out. And what he finally landed on was where we get it's a famous Latin phrase, cogito ergo sum, which means, and it's famous, it means I think, therefore I am. And that, from his perspective, is what shapes society. It's how it shapes our experience, what we do, and how we think. And if you take that and think about that in your own life, that's exactly who you are. We talked about that last night. They're old ideas. This is that thinking that shapes who we are, how we respond to life. And so step 4, we really start turning this work inward to look at this part of it. And we're really looking at, it's not, the addiction affected my thinking long before it affected my behavior. Alcoholism, long before that. And so I always have to remember that. And this here is just really starting to get into the mind, crack open this mind. You can almost see a fractured mind, this disconnection. And it's full of twisted delusions, twisted perceptions, all kinds of false pretenses about myself, about you, about God. It's what separates, what had me disconnected my whole life. And I'm afraid to look at it because it's not a moral inventory. It's a diagnosis that it's validation that I'm a moral failure in my life. And that's why I wasn't anxious to get what I already thought I knew about myself out on paper. It's just going to validate what I already know to be true. I'm a piece of crap. You know it. I know it. The people that are no longer in my life know it. God for sure knows it. So why in the world do I want to put this down on paper and sign a confession, basically? And that was really why I was afraid of the 4th step, on top of the fact that I had a lot of secrets, and most of those secrets are the same for all of us. Really 3 categories for men: either sexual crimes I committed I never got caught for, or they fall into the parental piece, what Tommy shared a little bit about as well. What holds us back. The shame really is driven by it. And this part of our discussion isn't about shame. It's about freedom. It's about clarity. It's about truth. But I didn't know that in the beginning. I avoided that. But when I got to this piece of work with Roy, and kind of like Tommy, Tommy's sponsor, would give him the little giggles and a little laugh, sarcasm, at his expense. Roy was no different. And I was time to do this inventory for the first time. I was terrified of it. Absolutely terrified of this thing. And I went over and sat down, and he handed me a yellow notebook. He wanted me to come to his kitchen table and do it because he knew that if I went anywhere else, I would drag. So just come here and sit down at my kitchen table and hand me a yellow notebook and a pen. And I said, well, how do I even start? He says, right across the header, write, I'm a liar, thief, and a cheat. And if you get distracted, just refer to the top of the page. And he was being funny, but at the same time, there's a little truth in that. But I'm terrified of this thing. And we're sitting there with that body of work. He goes, before you start, Harold, he goes, there's 3 things I know about an alcoholic. 1, they lie. 2, they lie. And 3, they lie about lying. I already know that. So just know what you're at. And so I just want you to write. So just go ahead and start, with what the book outlines, your resentments. And to be transparent, I didn't even know what a resentment was. I grew up in the Ozark Mountains. I quit school when I was 13. Resentment was never a word ever used anywhere in my service, ever. Never. My life depended on it. I couldn't even told you what that meant. And I'm like, well, I must not have any is what I'm thinking if I don't even know what it means. And that's my thought process. And he had grace. He says, well, let's change the word resentment. Let's change it to conflict. You ever had any conflicts in your life, Harold? I said, I've been in conflict my entire life. He goes, that's what we want to start about. I want you to write about those conflicts. And that really started my process. And what Tommy said was important because what Roy sat there with me too. He goes, Harold, you really got to understand the human nature, but also alcoholics are an extreme version of this. And Tommy lifted that a little bit up, that we always want to fabricate or elaborate on what's going on in our life, no matter how good it is. We either want to be a little sicker, a little better, whatever. And we're masters at it, and we've been doing it in our entire lives. We don't even know we're doing it. It's at a subconscious level, and we're good at it. He said it's kind of like the guy that was down at the riverbank fishing one day, and a little kid rode up on his bike and saw him fishing. He goes, hey, mister, have you caught any fish today? He goes, well, if I catch this one and one more, that'll give me 2 for the day. The kid goes, wow, that's awesome, man. He rode on. Not realizing the guy just told me I hadn't caught nothing, right? But he couldn't say that he didn't catch nothing. So we always want to look a little cleaner than we are. And this started before we ever took a drink. This is the power of the mind, the power of thought. What you think of me paralyzes me. And it can still happen very much today, all these years later, sitting here. And all of us, if we're honest, had some version of this already since we've been here. This very thing. It might be subtle or it may be extreme, but we've all had some version of this very thing. And social media took this disconnect and put it on steroids. And there's a lot of people around the globe today, tonight, whatever time zone they're in, that will commit self-harm but not take their life because they didn't get enough likes, they didn't get enough views, they didn't get enough attaboys, they didn't get enough emojis, they didn't get enough nothing. They needed validation, and they didn't get it, and so it just validated what they already knew to be true about themselves, and self-destruction set them, and they take their life. And that will happen all around the globe tonight. So leading cause of teenage death is suicide. And it comes from this disconnect. And it's what holds us back. It's why the lady said, I've been parked on this for 7 months because I don't want to uncover what I already know to be true. That I'm this labels. I'm the labels that have always been stuck all over me. And so we just want to avoid that stuff. And I did. I didn't understand the inventory whatsoever. But I could definitely relate to this fabrication and elaboration, no matter how good it was. I mean, it is still there today, It shows up in so many ways. It can show up in story stealing. You see this all the time. Somebody's going to tell a story about jumping through the ice. Before you even get finished, you've already wanted to tell your story about jumping through the ice. You haven't even let them finish. You're not even listening to listen. You're listening to respond so you can share your story. Story stealing. And this is all part of that stuff. We need validation. And our culture, when really the Western culture is one of the only cultures that does this to the human psyche in our minds. And it starts young, and it's individualism and consumerism and materialism that drives this culture that we live in, this very self-centered way. What do you want to be when you grow up, Tommy? This is how young it starts. Or you hear people say like this, man, I looked at the bikers, I looked at these guys, I looked at the Harley riders, I looked at guys in prison, I looked up to those guys were my heroes. You hear these types of things shaping who we are, what we do. And I didn't know any of that when I got here. That was what was going on. But that was the disconnect. That's what created all the pain. That's why I wanted to drink. That's why I wanted the relief. And if I drink again, that's why I'll drink, because I want that relief. Or if I jump off a cliff, it's going to be because I want the relief. Or if I get locked into some other behavior that's destructive in recovery, which is easy to do, it'll be because I want the relief in this delusion of control. So this is what we're trying to get to in this inventory of listing. And again, I didn't think I had any resentments because I didn't know what they were. But then I had my sponsor was very clear what that was. He goes, let me tell you what a resentment is, Harold. He said, a resentment, it's just like if this is a 4 by 8 foot piece of plyboard, and we went out and laid that on the ground, on the grass, and we left it there for 2 weeks, and then we went back and we picked it up and flipped it over, what color would the grass be? I said, well, it'd be kind of gnarly looking, yellow, brownish. And he goes, and if we flipped it back over in that same spot and we left it lay there for 2 or 3 or 4 more weeks, what would happen to the grass underneath it? He said, well, I said it would be dead, it would die. I said it would just be bare earth. He goes, yeah, that's what resentments do. He said they block you off from the sunlight of the Spirit. So you can just imagine your soul, your mind, your will, and your emotions, just like you got little pieces of plyboard plastered all over your soul, and they've been there your entire life. They probably overlap. There's probably not very many even cavities in that space. And the inventory is about, Tommy used the language, the Chuck C language, uncover, discover, discard. So the sunlight of the Spirit can start to shine in our soul, and we can start to heal from really ultimately a soul sickness, our mind, our will, and our emotions. And that's what this inventory is about. It's just about clearing this channel that's blocked us our entire lives, long before we ever drank. Long before we ever drank, this channel was blocked. And it created this disconnect and this irritable, restless, discontent feeling, this feeling of inadequacy. And it could go either way. It doesn't have to be the extreme, I'm not good enough. It could be the extreme, I'm better than you. Why do I have to do all this stuff? I'm better than this. I mean, it's always in extremes, always in extremes. But it drove my life. It literally drove my life. And it still can today if I'm not spiritually fit. I can really get lost in that stuff still today. And it's easy. But this inventory for the first time, getting into this and looking at the conflict in my life. And I'm starting to write this stuff out on a piece of paper. I told you about my dad. My dad, I only saw, my mom ran him off when I was somewhere between 2 and 3. I only saw my dad a handful of times. I can count on one hand how many times I saw my dad. The last time I saw my dad, I was 14 years old. He came from Oklahoma. He lived in Pryor, Oklahoma. He came to St. Louis, or to outskirts of St. Louis, to Hillsboro, Missouri, to watch me be sentenced for the first time. That was the last time I saw my dad. And he came there out of shame, I can promise you, for himself, for never being there. And this is where my life's ended up. That's what drove my dad there, I can guarantee you. And that was the last time I ever saw my dad. Now, I'm writing this inventory, and Roy stops to see where I'm at with it, and he's looking at that inventory, these conflicts I'm writing down. He goes, I don't see anything about your dad. I said, yeah, I don't have any beef with my dad. I never knew my dad. He goes, you don't have no beef with your dad? I said, no, I never had it. I only saw the guy a handful of times my whole life. He goes, well, let's unpack that a little bit. That doesn't bother you? You never had your dad in your life? I said, not really. I never knew the guy. He says, let me press you a little farther. This is where you got to get honest with yourself. When you were a kid growing up and people around other people's dads, and did you have envy for that? Absolutely. Okay, well, when they ask you about your dad, what'd you tell them? Did you lie about it? And he had me. I said, yeah, I did that a lot. I'd tell him he was a rodeo rider, he was a trucker, he was in the military. He was somebody other than he was. He was my wishing what he was. But he wasn't any of those things. And by the time I got done with that little bitty illustration with my dad, I had a great big hole in my soul. It was in the shape of a dad. But prior to sitting with that body of work, I didn't have no beef with my dad. And this is the power of thought. This is the power that shapes our lives and leaves us broken and stumbling through life, not knowing what's going on. And this is the power of the inventory, is to see that. I can promise you that at least a third, maybe more, of the resentments and the backing behind it, the story behind it, the drama behind it, was all illusion. There wasn't any truth to it at all. It was just my perception of it. And you know how this works. It worked all the time at the bar, especially if you were a little bit inebriated. It got you in a lot of fist fights. What are you looking at? You know what I'm saying? This is how it starts. But but it's sad. You know what I'm saying? It's sad. But it's sad, right? It's sad. And it's like, you know, and then all of a sudden the guy doesn't look at you the right way. It could happen this weekend. The guy doesn't look at you the right way. And they're like, what's up with that guy? And the next thing you know, you're fantasizing going Billy Jack, Bruce Lee on this guy. Right? And then you don't like the guy, and then you never talk to him for the rest of your life. If you've been here long enough, have you ever had a newcomer that's not a newcomer anymore walk up to you and go, I really didn't like you when I first met you? You never said anything to them. Never, you didn't know who they were, but I don't like you, I haven't talked to you, I've said stuff about you, I've thrown you under the bus 1,000, whatever. You'd never done anything to them. It all manifested between their mind. And I had a whole list of people on my inventory, and the question was, when's the last time you talked to them? Never. When's the last time you talked to them? 20 years. When's the last time you talked to them? I couldn't tell you why. Why are they here? And my answer was, I don't know. That was always my answer. My sponsor had a wooden sign made that said, I don't know, and it hung on the wall in the kitchen where we had this interrogation, because that's what it felt like, interrogation. So whenever he'd ask you a question, well, what part do you think you played in that? And he'd sit there for any length of time, he'd smile and point to the sign. I don't know. And then he had another sign on the other side of the wall that says, do you want to try the truth? So that was the dichotomy of learning how to be real for the first time. This whole process of being true for the first time was really hard to do. And it was, because of all the twisted perceptions I had about you, but I also had about me and about God for sure. And so this is what the inventory really helped me to see, especially in that resentment piece, that this is the most poisonous thing, because when I get this way, it's all I think about. I'm all I think about anyway. It's a real exercise for me to think about you. But when you add a little resentment, mix a little resentment into it, it's all about me, and it can consume me. That's why, separate me, the disconnect comes back in, next thing you know, I'm disconnected, and then I'm in trouble. And then either the behavior or the substances come closely behind. and you're in trouble. That's the pattern. That's why these resentments are so powerful. And the reason I know from my own experience why they're so hard to get rid of is because I water them, I nurture them, I fertilize them, I put Miracle Grow on them. They're my creation. I put a lot of years into this. You want me to just uproot it and throw it in the trash? Come on, man. And I was stuck. I was stuck in what? Victimization. Victimization had me by the throat up against the wall with his claws embedded in my throat. And it did. I'm here because of you. My life sucks because of the system. My life sucks because of them, they, whatever, going down the line. I had a blame list as long as the Mississippi River, why my life was jacked up, and I had plenty of co-signers to go along with it. And here's the deal. Have you ever met a happy victim in your life? Be honest with you. Ever met one? But this is what I was about. What's the book say? To conclude that others was wrong is about as far as most of us ever get. That's a fancy way of saying victimization. We speak victimese, and it will kill us. But it will kill us. And I can guarantee it, you take anybody in your life, any situation, sponsee, spouse, significant other, partner, child, friend, business partner, and they're jacked up, I mean, there's something going on. Victimization's right in the center of it. The IRS is screwing me. She's screwing me. Whatever, going down the line. But it's that victimization. We don't want to take any ownership for our life. Ever. We just want to pass the buck. We've been doing our whole. How long does that go? How long is blaming around? Well, the man blamed the woman, and the woman blamed the serpent. It's been around for a while. You know, pretty well perfected in the human race of passing the buck. And I never took any ownership for my life. So this is what I'm discovering about myself in this process. And it's scary, but it's also liberating at the same time. We're doing it. And then you get to the fear inventory. And it's like, I'm like Tommy. I was exactly like Tommy. I don't think I'm afraid of anything. And of course, my sponsor would really laugh hard at that. And I believed that. You know, back in the early 2000s, they had these little lowrider S10s, Chevy S10s that would ride around, you know, with the low rider all the way to the ground. It had a big old bumper sticker across the back. No fear. You know, that's what I would have rolled into town with, and no fear. But our book says that we're driven by 100 forms of fear, self-pity. But I didn't think so. This is how delusional it is. When I got sentenced the first time, and they put me in the car, separated from my mother for the first time, and they're driving me to this facility. I'm in the back seat. In this 100 forms of fear, self-pity, and self-delusion, well, they're riding with me. They're driving, actually. They're not even riding. They're driving the car. And this is what I mean when it's the power of thought. This is how the mind works. It's distorted, corrupted, contaminated mind. This is how the narrative went. You know, man, you can't go to an all-guys camp with the name Harold. The name Harold sucks. And they shut up. And they just sit there and with their arms crossed waiting for you to think about that. And, of course, I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, well, I don't know anybody named Harold. My dad, he didn't even go by Harold. He went by Jerry. I don't know why he went by Jerry. That's a mystery because there's no Jerry in his life. But he was going by, I said, I don't know. There's nobody in Rambo named Harold. There's nobody in Dirty Dancing named Harold. There's nobody in 50 Shades of Grey named Harold. There's nobody named Harold that's cool at all. The only guy named Harold at all on TV at that time was a cartoon on Saturday mornings. Some of you are old enough to remember that cartoon. Hey, hey. Right? Who was the dumbest guy on that show? Who was the dumbest guy? Old Weird Harold, right? He was the dumbest guy on that show. That was it. So you're already got a dilemma. But then you go to my middle name. My middle name was Eugene. There's nobody named badass named Eugene. No way. And my last name is long, so you take that acronym, it was hell, and that's what it was like living with that name until I got off the exit, and I changed my name to Jeffrey Allen Long, and that's what my name was till I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. But yet I would have told you I wasn't afraid of anything. You see the delusion? When they say it's driving your life, well, the inventory will really show you how fear is the driver of your life. It drives your life. What you think of me paralyzes me. I can promise you every piercing, every tattoo, every scar I got on my body, I could go through it all. It's all based on that disconnection, and fear is at the bottom of it. But it's so delusional, I don't think I'm afraid of anything. It's just crazy how that works. You go from I ain't afraid of nothing to like Tommy said, I'm afraid of everything. Well, I don't know that I'm totally afraid of everything, but it definitely drove my life. It drove my life. And fear still shows. I mean, the delusion that fear is going to be eliminated, eradicated forever is not reality. What I want it to be is a passenger, not a driver of my life. And that when it does show up, I can confess it. And there's a difference between having fear and being concerned. A big difference. If you're thinking about getting home, that's a real concern. That's a concern you should probably have carefully planned. How am I going to get back home safely and sound? That's a real concern. But fear is when it just sits there and owns my peace of mind. I'm sitting here and I can't stop thinking about visualizing going off in the ditch, being flipped upside down. Mark's over there thinking we're gonna miss the Rams game. We're not even gonna be able to see it on the screen or on the phone. That
Real fear.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm thinking about when I'm in the midst of something like this. That's what I'm talking about driving. It has control of what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. But it's going to be around. So but that's really what I had to get to with fear. It drove my life, drove it. And then the sex inventory. The secrets again: sex, crimes I committed, and the parental stuff. And this is really the truth. The sex is. I've been involved in 12-step work in places you don't want to end up for over 35 years, every week, with hardly ever missing those times. So I've sat with a lot of people in 35 years, in mostly maximum security prisons. So I've heard a lot of fifth steps. I've heard a lot of stuff. And I can promise you we can take all of our fifth steps, put them in a little pile, put them in a paper sack, shake them, drag one out, and it's the same inventory for every one of us. Different town, different decade, different zip code, but the nature of it is still the same. And this sexual stuff is where the stick. So and again, this is culture driving this. Your culture, the stigma that comes with this lifestyle is there. And so I grew up on the streets. 10 years old, I'm on the streets doing what I do, hanging around people I don't need to be hanging around with. And so when you get drawn into circles and you're 12, you can just visualize what would happen in that situation. And you get around some pretty broken people. You get abused in every way you can be, sexually, verbally, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, going down the line. I was jacked up before I was old enough to drive a car. I had slept with women old enough to be my mom before I was old enough to drive a car. And all this stuff is on my resume. My first encounters were with guys, You could sit there and say, well, it was, predatory, whatever. It's still part of my story, and it still put a label on me, and it still put a secret in my life. And Tommy said it best, the secrets, the very secrets that I want to take to my grave are what's going to kill me. It's what's going to put me there. The very thing I want to take to my grave is going to put me in the grave. But that is, so I had to get all that down and look at it. And I was no different. Tom self drove my life. It isn't about looking at all the partners and trying to name and shame you for all your sexual excursions. It's trying to see what's driving your behavior, what's behind the behavior. It isn't the fact that I had these encounters, but what's behind that? What's driving that? And I can promise you, it's the same thing that drove your alcoholism. You wanted a relief that it gave you. I had a guy tell me, he said, Harold, all you want is a woman in a box. That's what you want. You want a woman in a box. You get her out of the shelf, you take her down, you get her out, you do whatever it is you want to do with her, forever how long you want to do it, and you put her back in the box, you put her back on the shelf, and go live your single life. And you don't want anybody else to get her off the shelf. Nobody else can play with her. Yeah. Nobody else can play with her, right? But that's what you want. But what's behind that? So it isn't that so we want to, I think, sometimes focus about that, but what's driving that? What's driving that behavior? And so those are the things I really had to get down and look at. So I had a lot of secrets in that area. Today they're no big deal because I've healed from all that stuff. I could share all that stuff all day. It means nothing to me. It doesn't own the title to my soul anymore. The thinking has been changed. And that's really the hope of the 4-step, is to shift your thinking. What's the book say? The problem center's where? Yeah. It's a mind problem. But the good news is, and science will back it up, you can change the mind. But you gotta inventory what's going on there to start with before you can put new stuff in. Right? And that's what we have to do. But we're just notorious people with this stuff. And then of course, the parental stuff. And I didn't have a dad in my life, and my mom was never around. going down the line. And if you're a parent here and maybe you did time for child support, or you were labeled a deadbeat dad, or maybe you were abusive to your kids, whatever. There's that shame sitting here, and I promise you there's secrets sitting here that fall into those categories. So sex, I had a bunch of burglaries I never got caught for, and other petty crimes. I sat with a guy just last Thursday who was in treatment. He said, man, I really need to talk to you. Actually, somebody else called me and said, this guy wants to talk to you. And I sat down with this guy, and he was so paranoid, he was so nervous. He goes, I got this junk, and I haven't been able to stay sober. I've been battling this all my life, and I don't know what to do with it, but I feel like I can trust you enough with it. And I said, just what is it? And he talked about how violent he was back in his day, how he tortured people, sometimes for weeks at a time, locked in a basement or locked in a room. Talked about taking a guy's life, putting him in the trunk of the car and burying the car. That car has never been found today. He's lived with that all these years. What do you do with that? I've heard that many times, those kind of stories. What do you do with that? But if you don't get that out, it'll destroy you from the inside out. Absolutely destroy you. And so there's, you get that out and then you deal with it however you got to deal with it in 8 and 9, but it's got to come out. You got to get out. But here's the deal. I'll say this about step 4. And I'll give it to you this way. To see the truth of this is why we need the sponsors as much today as we ever did, because we need somebody who's not emotionally or financially involved in our lives, who can look at our life with clarity, with fair observation, and tell us the truth about our life. But that tendency to want to look a little cleaner than we are is always going on, because ego will never fully die. Self will never be fully eradicated. They will always fight to have their position in your life, always. I'm sitting new in sobriety. I'm at a Friday night meeting at a hospital with a guy named Lewis. Lewis is one of my favorite heroes. He's dead. African-American man, didn't have any education, worked as a janitor at a hospital his whole life, never had a car, had diabetes real bad, really, but he was just full of wisdom. And when he talked, he sounded like B.B. King. I mean, it was just pure soul that come out of his life. And I got a whole book of Lewisisms, a whole book. This guy really impacted my life. Like one of the first things he told me when I'm whining about my pathetic life, my victimese is pouring out, he looks at me and goes, well, Harold, God didn't drag you out of the ocean to drown you in the bathtub. Well, just think about that. There is so much wisdom in that, right? But getting to this truth piece, I'm sitting in a meeting one night and I'm vomiting my problem about this girl, taking no ownership, of course, for my part in any of this. I got this crazy girl and she's nuts. And people are trying to tell me I need to do this or do that, and I'm not wanting to do it. I'm explaining to it, all this to the meeting. I'm laying this out there for them. Great topic for the meeting. And Lewis, this changed my life. Lewis says, right here in front of the meeting, there's 15 people in the meeting. And he asked me if he could say something. I said, yeah, sure. And he goes, well, Harold, sounds like you got a problem with the shit sandwich. And everybody's just sitting there looking at him. I'm like, and he goes, you know what the shit sandwich is, Harold? I said, no, Lewis, I don't. Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked. He said, the pride's one piece of bread and the fear's the other. And you know what the problem with the shit sandwich is, Harold? I said, no, sir. You're the one eating it. Now, think about that. So I've wiped a lot of brown stuff off my chin because of that pride and fear. But they show up all of our life till the day we die. And the tendency is to want to look a little cleaner than we are. I call it the rule of 80-20, the delusion of 80-20. And everybody has it. And some of you guys got it going on right now, sitting here. And it may be 80-20, it could be 70-30, it could be 60-40, it could be 90-10, it could be 95-5, but you got it. Everybody has some of this stuff. And it's just in our my sponsor, your grand sponsor, Bob would say, he would add this piece to it. He would say that it's a gentleman's agreement with this 80-20. And in the rooms of recovery, it works like this. Tommy, you tell me about your 80%. I'll tell you about my 80%. Don't ask me about my 20. I'm not going to ask you about your 20. But that will kill you. And there's guys sitting here right now, I can promise you, really close to blowing up their life. Because they got her on a text. They got this person over here, they got this little sham going over here, they got this going on, whatever. We all got that junk. But it will separate you, will disconnect you, and eventually you'll lose your life. And you'll either drink yourself again or you'll be out of this circle. It will destroy you. But the delusion is I can control it. I'm giving you 80. I'm giving you 80 for goodness sake. But you want to hang on to that 20. And this is how deadly it is. One of my best buddies, Joe, rock star in AA, very legalistic AA. All the meetings, sponsored a bunch of guys, check the boxes, check the boxes, check the boxes. You saw him on paper, you go, holy smokes, man, I'm sucking. Here, this guy's got it all going on. But he fell prey to the 80-20. Had a good wife, 3 great kids, great job, financially secure, big engineer for a big corporation. But his job shifted, and they said, we're going to put you on the road. And they put him on the road with another engineer, another female who was married too. And they were on the road a lot together. And the lust, they gave in to lust, and they had the affair. And I got the call. Joe wasn't somebody I sponsored. He was just a friend of mine, acquaintance. But I get the call. Hey, did you hear what happened to Joe? He got caught up in an affair. It's blowing up everything. I said, well, it's really none of my business. If Joe wants to talk to me, he'll call me. Well, it wasn't just a few days later, Joe calls me. And I could hear the disconnect in his life. And he says, I effed up my life, man. I said, well, let me come over and talk to you. And I went over and sat with him on his back deck. His wife was gone on a cruise with her sisters. She's willing to reconcile through all this stuff. His mom's in the house watching his kids. His kids grew up with my kids. They were just like my kids. And he could see the white in his eyes. He looked like a shark. His eyes would just flip back. He was so broken. And so legalistic in his AA. You know, well, I think I need to do this. I think I need to do that. I said, I think you need to get help, brother. I said, I think we need to put you somewhere for just a week even, just to let you process what's going on in your mind. But the shame that came with that was so brutal you couldn't take it. And a week later, I'm driving my daughter to a family reunion. I see the caller ID. It's his wife. And I said, what's up? She goes, man, first off, I just want to thank you for everything you're doing for my husband and my family. I said, well, that's fine. I mean, we got through that small talk. I said, what's up? She says, well, we don't know where Joe is. He won't respond. We send a text, and I said, did you ping his phone? Yeah, my son's already pinged. It's over in Illinois somewhere. I said, well, he either threw the phone out of the window or he's where that's at. Call the highway patrol, whatever. Well, they found him, and he hung himself. In the most grotesque, painful example you could ever do. This is how much shame he had. And he hung himself. And I had to go do the funeral. They asked me to do the funeral. 500 plus 600 people in that room. His kids sitting front row. One of my best AA buddies. And he's gone because of the dirty little secret, because of the 80-20. And we just think we got power over it. And we got so much pride. You know, if I tell you this, I don't need to tell you this. I mean, I'm a big shot. I'm an AA superstar. I know the book. I sponsor guys. I got the Killer Home Group. I got all the stuff. And the fear says, man, you cannot tell people this. They will not invite you to come anymore. You won't be invited in these circles. They're not going to love you anymore. You're not going to speak anymore. And you listen to all this crap. And then the next thing you know, your plan of action is your fingers crossed, hoping that tomorrow's better than it was today. And we've done this our whole lives. It isn't new information, but we just carry it right into the program. So my challenge to all of us is that whatever that is, 80-20, 90-10, 99-1, whatever you're at on your journey, you got some of that stuff. I wouldn't leave here this weekend without sitting with somebody and say, dude, I just need to tell you what it is. And if you don't want to do that, it's because you don't want to, you think you're in control of it. And the reason you don't want to get rid of it is because it's giving you relief. It's giving you relief. The same thing you sought drugs and alcohol. This is why you don't want to get rid of it. So it doesn't show up in a booze. It doesn't show up in pill. It shows up in behavior. You know, we want the relief. And if you test the flesh, boy, I hope you hear this. If you test the flesh, you'll lose every single time. I don't care who you are, how long you've been doing this. If you test the flesh, you will lose every single time. And there's a cost to be paid. Are you willing to pay the cost? I got involved with a young lady early in sobriety. I was on step none. She was beautiful. I mean, really beautiful. She was about 6 months sober. I was 2 years sober. We hooked up. We got together. She got pregnant immediately. But immediately she didn't want to be in AA no more. She didn't want to be in Al-Anon. Didn't want to be in anything. I'm just out. I want to get away from all of this. me included. And she left with this child. What do you do with that? I don't even have a license, I don't have a car, I have nothing. But I filed a paternity suit against her. But eventually she got married, and ultimately it was the guy she had been with the whole time, even before this happened. I think she was hoping it was his kid, not mine, but it wasn't. She married that guy. They filed a cross suit to adopt a child. I dropped the paternity suit and went to court for that. So it was 3 years later. This kid's 3 years old by this time. And I go to court, and I'm just starting to work the steps. Roy's with me. My new wife's with me. My new child's with me. My boss is with me. 30 people from AA are with me. And I was never confident ever in my life in a court trial than that one, until I got up on the stand and they brought me up on stage, up to sit down. And that prosecutor filleted me like a fish. Filleted me. And when that court was all said and done, that judge hit that mallet. She says, based on all the evidence put forth today, the guardian ad litem with this child, everything that's happened, we're going to go ahead and grant the adoption, remove Mr. Long's rights, case dismissed. And it absolutely crushed my life. And there was no alcohol or drugs involved in any of that. It's just my behavior that's always been there. I saw something, I wanted it, and I was willing to go any length to get it. And that's what it cost me. And we'll talk more about that in the next session a little bit. But the point being is this, this wanting to be free, the inventory, the sharing the truth, getting to the truth, and then going back and really becoming, trying to grow into the image that God wants me to be. That God always had in store for me. But there's so many labels that got to be shed. There's so much delusion of our thought that's got to go away. So that, are you entirely ready? Or are you entirely willing? You could just switch the words out. For God to have his way with you, to shape you into the person that he's always wanted you to be through his perfect love. If you want to use a religious term, it would be called sanctification. Just trying to make you a little bit more holier than you are. Bringing you along spiritually a little bit at a time. You're not the same yesterday as you were today. Are you willing to do that? That's the metaphor. You've all had surgery, or probably had major surgery where you've had to take anesthesia. But think about that process. You go there, you're totally defeated, you're hurting, you can't fix yourself, you're done, you're out of ideas, I need help, can you do this? And they're really into a hospital room. And the nurse comes in and says, we're going to give you some vitals, and we're going to do some stuff, we're going to check some stuff and get you prepped. The anesthesiologist will be here in a few minutes to talk to you. Do you have any questions? No. All right, see you in a little bit. We'll see you inside. Then the anesthesia and his team come in. Have you ever had anesthesia before? Do you have any, are you allergic to it? Have you had any side effects? They go through all these questions and they make sure you're prepared. They say, hey, we're going to give you a little something, take the edge off. When we go in, we're going to have count to 10 backwards. You'll be out. Probably going to take 2 hours for the surgery. You'll wake up and recover. Everything should go smooth. You good? Got any questions? No. Well, the doctor and his team will be in here in a minute. And then the doctor and their team come in. What are we operating on today? Left leg. Get that marker out and mark that right leg. You want to make sure they got the right leg. They put a mark on it. Tell you what you're going to do. They go through all the questions, explain everything, and then they ask this question. Are you ready? And you say, yeah, I'm ready. Great. Let's do this. That's step 7. Yeah, that's step 6 and 7. Are you ready to become the guy God always created you to be? Because at that moment, you turn your will and life over to him. They could have put a carrot nose and a donkey tail on me. I don't care. They could have done anything to me. But I trusted that I was going to come out better than I went in. And this dying to our behaviors is a process. It really is a process. And so it will go on for the rest of our life. My sponsor, I asked Tom that very question, my sponsor Tom, why is there only 2 paragraphs in a big book for 6 and 7? His answer, they don't want you to camp out there. Because you're going to be practicing this for the rest of your life. So what you want to hope happens is that your behavior little by little becomes a little bit more objectionable to you than it was yesterday. And if it's not, that's a great prayer to pray. God, I've got this porn addiction. Please make it objectionable to me. God, I got this money problem. I got more month than I do money. Make it objectionable to me. Whatever behavior's ripping you up. And it's that. And can I just do that on a daily basis? But then let's move on. Let's talk about 8 and 9. That's what we're going to do in the next session. So 80-20. Please don't leave here this weekend without unpacking that. That's all I got, thanks.
Good job. You gotta stop, I don't mean to laugh, but you gotta stop smacking